Welcome to the Sunday Property Breakfast with Candice Anderson.
And Adrian Jones.
As we audition, obviously, for the One Show. This is a general election special, but please don't switch off. There's a few things I should point out. This is going to be very, very low on politics. And we are definitely not going to try to influence in any way the way you should vote. But it's also not a complete political view. So we're going to work on the basis for the decisions in property that one of Conservative or Labour are going to get in. And that's not ignoring the other parties, but we're just being fairly factual about that is what is most likely to happen as a result of the election. So just wanted to make that point clear, but this is not a political broadcast at all. The things we're going to cover in the main, we will touch on a little bit about broad policy. But the main thing we actually want to cover is what happens when a general election is called and what impact does that have on the property market. This came as a result of a chat, really.
A chat and a coffee.
Yeah. And you said that exact question to me. And I said, well, I've got a pretty good idea of what my thoughts would be, but why don't I just refine that, have a look at it, do a bit of research, and then we'll cover it in a property breakfast.
Well, you are wiser. You know far more about politics than I do.
I probably don't, but it's mainly the fact that A, I'm older.
Wiser.
Thank you. And secondly, I've lived in this country all my life, and you've been a globetrotter.
That's right.
So that background really is why it probably was you raising the question, and I thought, well, I might have the answers for that. So I suppose you could be Fiona Bruce or whoever you wish to be in your political guise, and I suppose I'm going to end up being Chris. Oh God, I've forgotten his surname, or Robert Peston, or somebody similar, but again with a very small P. So fire away with your thoughts.
So, Adrian, coming back to the election, what was the state of the market when the election was called?
We'd had after a fairly chaotic 12 months, we had a reasonably stable winter. It's obviously a quieter time in the market, but there was no really disrupting factors. And so we had quite a stable market. People were still buying and selling, albeit in smaller numbers. We've had a bit of a spring bounce. Mm-hmm. I'll have to refer to some figures, but the nationwide house price index nationally has a rise of 0.6% over the last year. Halifax said 1.1%. I'm never a big fan of national statistics, but locally we've seen a similar impact. Those figures of 1 and 0.6 suggest that we've got a fairly static market, and that's what we're seeing locally. It is very, very price sensitive still, but there are more buyers registering. There are more vendors on the market than there were 12 months ago, and there were still plenty of buyers registering. The interesting thing about the pricing, as I mentioned to you earlier today, I did a bit of research last night about the alerts I get. I'm registered for
very interesting.
alerts on Rightmove,
Yep.
and I looked at the last 100 alerts I've got, which is over the last 9 or 10 days for the various areas I look at. 54 of them were price reductions as opposed to brand new properties on the market. So that's already saying that over half the properties on the market are overpriced and have had to be adjusted. That's those that have been adjusted as opposed to those that have come and had offers. So I think that's a very big point in the market at the moment. It's active. As I say, more properties were on the market than a year ago because that was still slightly post-Truss economics. Mm-hmm. But pricing is still hugely sensitive because of all the things that have gone on in the meantime. So, and of course, the shadow over that has been the interest rate cut, which we still haven't yet seen.
And I mean, with all of this said, what does a general election mean for the property market?
History says that, particularly when you've got quite a cautious market as we have, is that people press the pause button. And, you know, it is the biggest decision of your, at the time, really buying and moving home. It's not just the buying of the asset, but the whole physical move. And so when you get a major change like a general election, a lot of people will press the pause button, rightly or wrongly, but that is just what happens instinctively. People go, oh. What's curious about this one is it was a surprise. I think it was possibly even a surprise within the Conservative Party because I think their manifesto would have been out.
Yeah.
Because if they were doing this in the background, you'd have thought that their manifesto would have been out quite quickly, and it's not. So it was certainly a surprise, and it's rare to have an election in July. They're nearly always in the spring or the autumn.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's coincided not with summer holidays when the market actually carries on, but that June, July period when people are pretty chaotic, end of uni, end of school, beginning of summer holidays, people are just really, really busy doing stuff. And the market tends to go a little bit sort of quiet and shallow anyway during that period. And it doesn't stop, but it pauses. So we've had a bit of a pause and then a harder pause as a result of that.
So, interesting question for you. Do you think the possible change in interest rate is more important than the general election?
More important.
Is that a difficult question?
Okay, so we had trust economics. We had interest rates flying high.
Yeah.
They've leveled off. For probably for most of this year, probably since December time, people have been waiting for that base rate drop.
Yes, yeah.
And it hasn't happened. We then finally, inflation has come down to 2.3%. Mm-hmm. And in May, everybody thought, here is the base rate drop. And it still didn't happen. Most of the commentators said it definitely is going to happen in June. Suddenly, we get an election announced. It is thought that the Bank of England are very unlikely to change an interest rate in the middle of an election. So it looks now like we're going to get that. The dates are the 1st of August would be the next one, and then the 19th of September. I can't see them waiting to the 19th, but it does look unlikely that they'll do an interest rate change on the 20th. So is it more important? Short term, possibly is, because it's having an immediate impact on very specifically how much is that mortgage going to cost me,
Right.
which is, the decision of buying a property. And even if you can still borrow that amount, people might look at that figure and say, I'm not going to buy that much. I'm not going to spend that much. I'm going to rein it in a little bit and I'm going to look at a different property. So it does have an immediate, really big impact on people. I think the other thing that is an important factor in the inflation rate is that it does have the biggest impact is clearly on the interest rate.
Yes, yeah.
Though we should also take into account the fact that the banks are hugely competitive and are anticipating that base rate change. So when we do get it, if we get it, because it's not certain that we will, they've arguably already adjusted their products anyway.
True.
Because they're all trying to compete with each other, because if they don't lend money, they don't make money. So they've got to try and do that. The other impact, though, of the 2.3% recent inflation rate compared to the really scary 8, 9, 10%, is that people will just feel that their future is going to be a little bit better, because if things aren't going to go up by 10% next year, they're going to go up by 2 or 3%. They'll think, I might have a bit more money in my pocket.
Exactly.
So they'll feel a little bit better about things.
So do you think that sentiment is really important in the property market?
It is. I think it's important within the property market. I think it's important within election. Unfortunately for property commentators who love chucking out stats all over the place, a lot of people will go with a lot of gut instinct about how they feel about moving home and buying and selling a home. And unfortunately for the politicians who are probably going to be pinging all sorts of stuff at us for the next few weeks, a lot of people will go on a real gut feeling about it. It can be overwhelming
for many people.
We've talked a lot about how it's overwhelming within the property market, and that it's okay if you are a professional within it, because it's what you deal with. It's your currency.
Yeah.
As a homeowner who has a job but you need to move house, and think of it, when you just get stats chucked at you, which are usually to justify an argument, it can be really, really confusing. Interesting about the word sentiment, people instinctively think of Rightmove.
Yes.
The second one they think of is Zoopla. On the market have been the poor relation of the three. They've lasted longer than any other third major portal. They've just had some massive investment. And interestingly enough, when they release their sort of market update, they call it the property sentiment, market sentiment. So they do tap in more to the emotional side rather than they obviously put statistics, but they ask questions like, how do you feel about moving, rather than prices have gone up, prices have gone down.
That's really important. That's really important.
Well, I think it is, because I do think it's why people make decisions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I really do think
Absolutely.
that's the case.
I know you don't want to talk too much about policy, Adrian, partly because we don't want to make it super political.
Mm-hmm. Yes. There's a couple of reasons why I don't want to make it too political. Also, policies will adapt through the course of the election. So if people are watching this after we've recorded it, and later, I want it to have some longevity, so at least last to vaguely the 4th of July. But I just want to steer away from some of those specifics. At the end of the day, we're talking about the consequences of an election being called, as opposed to the post-election. And we're also looking at two parties, not the umpteen parties and the parties that may represent you in your constituency, because we're not here to present a political debate.
No.
We're looking at, it's going to be one of the two, what could happen as a result of that. But the thing is, I say, policies can get adapted as well. You know, somebody will announce a policy on a Monday.
Yeah.
Depending on its reaction, it'll be tweaked in the press on Tuesday.
Exactly.
Because of it's all not as popular as they thought, and they'll embellish it and what have you. So we just want to avoid some of that fine detail of policy.
Oh, absolutely. But what about the party's broader approach to the property market?
Yeah, so this is probably less specifics of policy. We'll touch on a couple of things they've said of late. But if you look at, coming back to where we started in terms of older and wiser, 40 years ago, scarily, when I first started to think I'd be voting and starting to think of these things, the two, Labour and Conservative, were that far apart. It was poles apart in terms of their backgrounds and their policies. Over that time, they are now much, much closer. So 40 years ago, from one party change to another was a big change in people's potential earnings and taxation and property ownership. It's now much, much tighter. So we've got a situation now where both of those major parties are very pro-home ownership. Mm-hmm. Both of them are trying to make it more affordable for people to buy a property. And just how they go about it may vary.
Yep.
On a couple of bits of policy, the Conservatives are looking like they're wanting to try and get rid of stamp duty at a lower level. And Labour have talked about having this deposit guarantee scheme, so that the deposit barrier to buying, a 10% deposit representing £40,000-50,000 in a lot of areas. That's a lot of money for somebody to save who's had student loans and...
Oh, absolutely.
So they're trying to overcome that barrier. So how you go about it can differ. But, those are key policies that they both agree on. And the other longer term policy, both of them want to build more houses. The Conservatives had an original target of about 300,000 they've been trying to do. They pared that back. They've not been able to achieve it, but they want to try and build more. It's a difficult thing to do in this country with planning.
Very difficult. And land.
Thoughts about green belt and brown belt and grey belt. That's a completely separate discussion, but the desire is to do it. And Labour, in their policies way before the election was called, said when we come into power, is what they would say, if they come into power, they want to build 1.5 million new homes over 5 years, which is actually back to the 300,000 again. So they're both, again, that policy overlaps. How they do it, their ability to deliver it, that may vary, but the policies are overlapping, which is why, coming back to my previous thought, this isn't a polarization of, they're in or they're in. This is
right.
It's probably unfair to say they're nuances, because there is more defined differences than that. But it is not a polarization of opinion and policy that it used to be.
So if I'm a buyer with a general election coming up, what should I do? What would you advise?
If you are a buyer who's bought or sale agreed, I don't see anything in any commentary on what's going on to suggest you should pull out and change your mind. It's not one of those impacts. If you are still looking to buy, haven't bought yet, there will be an instinct to press the pause button, be cautious about any major change, even if actually deep down it doesn't change anything. You see it weirdly. This is a bad comparison, probably. You see it at Christmas. You see it in you see it in November where people say, "Oh, I'm gonna stop looking until Christmas."
Yes,
and you sort of say to people, "What do you think will be different on the 2nd of January?" And of course, invariably nothing is, other than the calendar's changed. And it's a little bit like that. It's not quite as crass as that, but it's a little bit like that. That on the 5th of July, whoever get into power, most people won't have at that stage a significant change in what they're doing. So, but people will press the pause button, and I understand that. It's caution, and we're in a cautious market. We're not in a boom market.
Yeah.
If you're a savvy buyer, and say there's 10 people who might go and look at a house over a period of 2 or 3 weeks, it's not like it was where you'd have 10 on the same day.
Yes.
If 5 of those have pressed the pause button, there's only 5 of you looking at it. So you've got a better chance, actually, of buying the house you may want at the moment if you carry on as the buyer. So if you feel confident, if you feel that whatever happens in the election isn't going to affect you very much short term, I'd carry on. Just know what things are going to cost you.
Right, which is very good advice. What if I'm the seller?
My advice would be the same if you had sold or had a sale agreed.
Yeah.
I see nothing in, I say, any commentary, anything that's going on economically that would suggest that your sale now is a bad idea, one way or the other. So I'd carry on with your sale. If you're thinking of coming to the market or on the market and not getting the results you have, and the market's paused a little bit, it comes to what I think might be an overriding thing that happens as a result of the election because of when it's happened.
Yes.
If people have pressed the pause button in June and we get an answer at the beginning of July, schools are broken up, people are going on holiday, there will be a number of people who keep the market going because not everything stops forever, but there will be quite a few people who say, do you know what? I'm just going to wait until the end of the summer.
Yeah.
Again, rightly or wrongly, I totally understand why people would do that. As a vendor, whether you're on the market and unsuccessful or thinking of coming to the market and the election has slightly scuppered those plans, what I'd say is use that time over the summer not to just sit and take in the sun and music festivals and whatever else.
Something you would do.
Which is something I will do. But to come back actually to last week's podcast, the home selling workshop idea, look at your property. What can I do to it? How can I prepare? Make my property better. Look at last week's podcast, everybody. That tells you what it's all about. Come to our next home selling workshop on the
Meet us in person.
9th of July.
That's it.
From on the Lake.
6 p.m. to 8 p.m.
Prepare yourself for your property. So when you are ready in September, using my old one, you've painted your front gate, you've done some essential repairs. We understand you, we understand your house. And that would be a really, really good way forward. I don't see anything in the market for people in it at the moment to significantly change what they're doing. Does that go some way to explaining it?
Oh, 100%. 100%. You're very good. 100 out of 100.
Yeah,
Goodness
that's
me.
very good. I've never got
But
that
hang on a
score.
minute, Adrian. Here we go. Trick question for you.
Okay.
What do you think is going to happen?
I think I touched on it right at the end there, is that in spite of the reasons why people should buy, and I think it's a sound idea, I think what we'll see happen is we have a summer of activity from those who are more urgent in their need. Whatever that reason was to buy and sell in the first place, if the clock is really ticking on that, they'll carry on. I think anybody who wants to move, wants to buy, wants to sell, I think they will just be a bit slower doing it, and they'll use the election and the summer, not as an excuse, but as a reason why they'll say, do you know what, I'm just going to wait. I'm just going to wait. And I understand why people do that, and historically that's what they've done.
Yeah.
And human nature says that when there is a major change, and coming back to what I said, it's not a change like that anymore, but whatever happens, even if the Conservatives stay in, that's a change, because at the moment, people are not expecting them to stay in,
Correct.
judging by the polls
Yep.
before the election called and since. And obviously, if Labour come in, that's a change. If the monster raiding Looney Party come in, we'll have to do another Sunday property breakfast and assess the situation in the country then. But whatever happens, it's a change.
Yeah.
You know, it's a mandate for another 5 years. It's a change of government for 5 years. And I totally understand why people would say, do you know what, I'm going to press the pause button and I'll see what things are like when the dust has settled in August and September. Questions answered? If you've got any more, by the way,
It leaves a lot to think
them in.
about. I personally feel that you've answered all the questions in such a way that it's going to not just leave me thinking, but everybody else in a positive sense, rather than doom and gloom sense.
If you think of our current vendors and the people who are currently viewing and looking to make offers, nothing has changed since the election was called.
No, nothing.
Nothing has changed at all. They are still looking. They are still saying, if you've got, if that house doesn't suit them, let me know when you've got another one.
That's right.
None of them have changed. So that makes me think that it will perpetuate, but the new people coming into the market, the people less urgent, will say, I'll hold back.
Exactly.
I hope that's been of help. If you've got any questions on that, don't ask me about politics. Please don't. I hope we've not made it political. I think we steered clear of that. A couple of bits of policy, overall feelings, and hopefully it's just helped you realise what may happen in the property market. If you want to know about the home selling workshops, get in touch with us. If you want to register as a buyer, just get in touch with us as well. Thank you, as always, for watching the Sunday Property Breakfast. Candice, thank you for those really good questions.
Thank you for having me, as usual.
And we look forward to seeing you again next week when we're going to be talking about the importance of considering your pets when you're buying and selling a home. Thanks again for watching. We'll catch up with you again soon. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Sunday Property Breakfast podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this week's episode. Please feel free to share it with anyone you know who you think might benefit from these exclusive market updates. And if you have a question that you'd like us to answer directly, then just email Adrian@define, that's DFINE.co. See you next week.